On the edge. Angry Lebanese took to the streets over a central bank announcement that withdrawals from dollar deposits at a low fixed rate would be halted. The country is in the throes of a deep financial crisis wrought by decades of endemic corruption, waste and mismanagement, but it's threatening its stability and is described by the World Bank as one of the deepest depressions in modern history. What measures can be taken to improve the economic situation in Lebanon? NASA has announced plans to launch a pair of missions to Venus between 2028 and 2030, the first in decades, to study the atmosphere and geologic features of Earth's so-called sister planet and better understand why the two emerged so differently. The US Space Agency says that it will award each around $500 million to develop the two missions. How important are these missions for space exploration? And the insurer for Ever Given says that the speed of the container ship that blocked the Suez Canal in March was controlled by the Egyptian waterways operator before it ran aground. The statement from UK Club came after the head of the Suez Canal Authority said that the ship was sailing too fast when it became grounded, but that the canal bore no responsibility. But who really does bear responsibility for the grounding? And those are the top three stories that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Let's get started. Lebanon, a country that's gone through more than its fair share of crises in the last few years, has been marred by street protests and confrontations for months. Let's have a look at how the situation has deteriorated over the last year alone. Reversing a decision to stop withdrawals that triggered street protests, the governor of Lebanon's central bank has reassured depositors that it is not bankrupt and that people's deposits are safe and would be returned soon.
Lebanon has reversed a decision to stop withdrawals from dollar deposits at a fixed rate, much lower than the informal market but higher than the official peg, after protests erupted. Lebanese banks have locked depositors out of their dollar accounts and blocked transfers abroad, but under the circular issued last year, depositors were permitted to withdraw dollars with the funds paid in the local currency at a rate of £3,900 to the greenback. Lebanon is in the throes of a deep financial crisis, wrought by endemic corruption and mismanagement that is threatening its stability and is described by the World Bank as one of the deepest depressions in modern history. In a report this week, the World Bank predicted that Lebanon's gross domestic product, which has already shrunk from $55 billion in 2018 to an estimated $33 billion last year, would contract by a further 9.5% in 2021. The World Bank added that the crisis was being aggravated by a debilitating institutional void caused by political deadlock.
And I joined live from Tripoli by Dr. Sami Halabi, who's an academic and activist. And live from Athens in Greece by Sami Halabi, who's a member of the Depositors Union of Lebanon's Socioeconomic Committee. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today here on The Edge. Dr. Sami, let me start with you. Could you explain to us what the current situation is? The World Bank's described Lebanon's economic and financial crisis as perhaps one of the worst in the last 150 years. What is the current situation?
Well, good evening. It's with a great pleasure being with you again. So over the past 2 weeks, the Lebanese pound has lost more than 20% of its value against the dollar on the black market. And since October 2019, the exchange rate has decreased by 90%, affecting everyone's life in this country. The depreciation of the pound resulted in very high inflation of 84 to 85% in 2020, which is catastrophic. And to make things worse, actually the food inflation stood at 400%. Meanwhile, the GDP contracted by 25% to 26% last year. And as you have mentioned, the World Bank estimated that 50% of the Lebanese population has slipped below the poverty line. What we are seeing currently in Lebanon is a classic circle. The worse the economic situation gets, the more the currency depreciates and vice versa. So if we need to have a clear statement on the situation, I can say that actually currently the country is literally running out of money. The foreign reserves have decreased from about $30 billion to about $60 billion nowadays, of which only $1 billion is available to subsidize food and fuel imports. These reserves are really important because the central bank essentially subsidizes medicine, fuel prices by providing importers with dollars at the official exchange rate. So as for now, we can say that the country is literally running out of money. The foreign reserves have decreased, and we have only $1 billion that are available to subsidize food and fuel imports. So there is no way out of the nation economic crisis spiral and the endless and uncontrolled devaluation of its currency to be solved anytime soon without an agenda. And what we are seeing right now, that there is no clear and specific political and economic agenda that includes ranging economic and tax and fiscal reforms in order to get out of this economic crisis.
So it's a dire situation. Sami, can I come to you now? And the numbers themselves are just horrific. I'm familiar with the effects of decreasing currency rates, but the numbers that we're talking about are huge. Not only the currency becoming valueless, but also the prices increasing, and the very real threat of a country becoming literally bankrupt. What is the way forward from here? What options are there?
The way forward, I think, is for the central bank and the government and the political powers that be to stop trying to buy time. Basically, the moves that have been made over the past year and a half and more since the beginning of this crisis have been to buy time. I disagree that there's not a plan. There is a clear plan on the part of the political class, which is colluding with the banking class, be it the central bank or the Association of Banks in Lebanon, to buy time, because the more time they implement a multiple exchange rate policy that does not reflect Lebanese law, which says very clearly that all deposits are to be returned in the currency which they were provided, unless there is a capital control law, unless there is a law that Parliament passes that changes the exchange rate, legally speaking, the banks are obliged to return the money to the Lebanese depositors. If they do not, then the shareholders are liable. And so what has been happening over the past year and a half is that the central bank and the political class have been providing cover to the banks. Many of the political class also own shares in banks. And as a result, we're all suffering and we're all eating losses that have accumulated over decades and decades of financial mismanagement and corruption and a Ponzi scheme that was put together in the most intricate fashion in order to benefit the banks and the central bank. And now when it's come time to pay the piper, they don't want to go for it. So people are understandably angry. And so when you see these images of people on the streets, it's because they've gone to their utmost lengths of they've come to the utmost length of their patience with this political class, and they have to express their anger somehow. Now, the pandemic has quelled the protests in the street, but now we are getting to the point where people can't handle it anymore, and the political class needs to come up with a solution, and they don't want to, so they're going to play for time, and we're in an explosive situation where people are losing their livelihoods, their savings, their patience, and we are on the edge, and it's time for the central bank and the political class to listen to the Supreme Court, which has ruled that people should get their money back, their money back in the currency which it was deposited, or there can be a capital control law and move towards a fair, comprehensive, and accountable plan for recovery and distribution of losses that does not place the burden on the people of Lebanon.
In the early days of banking, banks were supported by a stock of gold in the vault, and so they always had some assets to offset against the money that they were using in a paper form, so to speak. But from what I can imagine, this isn't the situation in Lebanon. So, how realistic is the possibility that, following the law, as you suggest, that the Lebanese banks can pay back the money that the people have deposited?
Well, I mean, right now, around $14 billion have left the bank's liabilities and been haircut from people's savings since the beginning of the crisis. $6.7 billion have left the country. Those are people with connections to the bank.
I'm really sorry, Sami. I have to interrupt you. We're needing to go live. The Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is speaking, and we're going to go live to him now. We'll be back.
Aziz milletim, kıymetli Zonguldaklılar,
My dearest nation, dear citizens of Zonguldak, dear guests, I salute you all with my most heartfelt emotions. Today in Zonguldak, we had a series of visits which were all beautiful. We